Have you tried the question? Boleh buat?
Boleh Miss, cuma maybe nak explain sahajalah sebab nak buat essay kan.
Aha. Okay, okay. How about Evelyn? Maybe Evelyn getting ready. Okay. Still working on it. Alright, alright. Okay, so let's look one by one. Let's use this tutorial to recap the things that we should have gone through lah for the past few weeks. Okay, so the tutorial question basically covered 3 topics. Okay, enzyme, then we have carbohydrate metabolism and lipid metabolism. Okay. So the first question is asking you illustrate with suitable diagram the effect of substrate concentration on the reaction velocity of an enzyme. Sama kan? Takut salah paste pula. Alright. Okay. So whenever that you have come across questions like this, okay, so for your exam later on, just very briefly, we will do revision later on, but the exam question would have MCQ part and also essay part. Okay, so for essay like this, you will be required to have an introduction. Okay, and then what is the main point? Main point basically you answering the question lah. Okay, the main point, and then one conclusion. Okay, so you need to expect your answer would have minimum 3 paragraphs. 1 paragraph for introduction. Okay, and you can put your main points in 1 paragraph or you want to separate, up to you, but 1 paragraph for conclusion. Okay, we will do practice on that, but let's focus on the content first, right? So for this question, it's asking you illustrate with a suitable diagram. Okay, so this is meaning that you need to include a diagram. Okay, the effect of substrate concentration on the reaction velocity of an enzyme. Okay, so if you remember in the chapter enzyme, these are the 4 graphs that you will see. Okay, we will do an experiment on this later on to check on the effect of these factors on the enzyme rate of reaction. Okay, so when it comes to graph like this, okay, you need to remember this is the y-axis, this is x-axis. So x-axis is basically what we are manipulating. Okay, what are we trying to put in to see the changes? Okay, for example, the x-axis would be pH. So you are trying putting the enzyme in different pH. Okay, x-axis can also be substrate concentration. Okay, meaning that this is the lowest concentration on the left. So increasing concentration of substrate, and then you see what is the effect of in terms of the enzyme reaction. Okay, you can also put the reaction in different temperature. Okay, increasing temperature, and then see what happens to the rate of reaction. Same goes to increasing enzyme concentration. So basically, x-axis should be something that you put or you change. Okay, you manipulate. Okay, so the y-axis would be, you can write in either rate of reaction. So when it comes to rate, you have to imagine there's time involved. So for example, in 1 minute, what is the rate? What is the velocity? Okay, so you can put in rate of reaction, or you can write in something like the question, reaction velocity of an enzyme. Okay, so depends. But the safest one, you can just write rate of reaction. Okay, so question like this, illustrate with a suitable diagram. You don't need a specific unit, okay, or the specific name of enzyme. You can just write in rate of reaction of enzyme, because it just want you to briefly or in very general to describe your explanation. Okay, so in this case, it's basically effect of substrate concentration. Okay, so these 4 different factors, pH, substrate concentration, temperature, and enzyme concentration, it has a specific graph. So this is the expected graph. So you cannot be drawing pH graph, but your line is enzyme concentration. So even though your axis is correct, but the drawing the graph drawing is wrong. So tak boleh jugalah. Okay. So you need to be able to identify. Okay. So this question is asking on effect of substrate. So let's look into, so how is the shape of effect of substrate? So it's increasing to a certain point, it reach plateau like this, a stagnant point. So this is the expected diagram. So it shouldn't be macam ni, bell shape. So this one is wrong. So if you just write in like enzyme concentration like this, so this is wrong as well. Okay, so the expected shape would be substrate concentration. Something like this. Okay. So for this one, you can question like this. If it's mentioning to you, it wants you to illustrate with suitable diagram, mean there will be marks on diagram and marks on explanation. So it has both marks. You cannot just draw and leave it there. It has to be explained. Okay. And your diagram has to be complete or at least understandable, something like this. Okay. You cannot be just like drawing the axis and then the shape of graph. Itu tak boleh lah because it's not explaining this is what, this is what. Okay. So it's something like this. Alright. So the illustration yang yellow orange color ni is just for me to explain to you. For you to describe, you can only just draw something like this, very straightforward, simple like this. Okay. Okay. So again, let's recap. So this is the graph for effect of substrate concentration. Substrate means the things that is being broken down or metabolized. Okay. Enzyme is the means. Okay. So what happens as we increase the substrate concentration? You can see based on the graph. So this is towards the right is increasing concentration. So when we start to increase the substrate concentration, what happened to the rate of reaction? It's increasing. Okay, so this is increasing. This is increasing. Okay, so that's point number 1. Okay, the rate of reaction or velocity increases initially with an increase in the substrate. Or you can be very straightforward. As the substrate concentration increase, the rate of reaction of enzyme increase at the initial phase. Okay, so that is number 1. Then what happened? So as the reaction proceed, okay, a high concentration of substrate, enzyme gets saturated and you can see the velocity starts to decrease. So it's not as sharp increase like this. Now it's starting to become slower, the reaction. Okay, and then concentration of enzyme is kept constant. So we are not increasing the concentration of enzyme now. So in this diagram over here, enzyme is illustrated as the yellow colored ones. So this is 1 through 3. So this 6, and then sini pun ada 6. So we are not increasing the enzyme concentration. Okay, there is an increase in the concentration of substrate. Okay, the yellow ones, the orange ones are the substrate. Okay, but you can see the rate of reaction is getting slower. At one point, what happens? It becomes plateau or stagnant. So it's now becoming, even though you are increasing the concentration of substrate, but now reaction is no longer increased. So you have to mention at one point, it will reach a plateau or a stagnant point. Or you can say after it reaches maximum point. Okay, up to you. Okay, so after this specific point, you have to mention what happens after it reaches one point. Even though you increase the amount of substrate, the rate of reaction is not increased. So why is that so? You need to explain why at one point it becomes stagnant like that. Rate of reaction is not increased. So why? Because all the enzyme molecules are converted into the enzyme substrate complex. Or you can say this active site of the enzyme is fully occupied by substrate. So no reaction can continue or proceed. Okay, so it's actually easier to describe when you have diagram. It's for your own explanation. So when you want to describe a diagram, just refer back to your diagram and try to explain each part that is happening. Okay, what are the changes that you see? Okay, so in this kind of question, memorizing is one thing. You need to be able to remember, okay, pH macam mana, substrate macam mana, okay, the shape, and then in terms of explaining itself, you can just go one by one based on the diagram that you draw. Okay, so at this initial part, what you see. Second part, what you see. Third part, what you see. You describing what you see, you already get 1 mark. And then you explain why. Then you get another mark. Okay, so for today's tutorial, the marks that I have allocated here is not specific lah. Okay, just to give you an overview. Okay, if this is something that you can expect. If the question asks you 8 marks, minimum you need to write 8 sentences. Okay, something like that. You cannot be writing macam the question is 8 marks tapi you write for me 2 sentences. So that is impossible lah. Unless your sentence memang panjang. Macam tu. Okay, so if question asks you 10 marks, so minimum you need to have 10 sentences, right? So that is for the first question. So if it's asking you on, okay, you shouldn't be writing the explanation in point form because this is essay and it should be written in paragraph form. So you need to have an introduction, paragraph, and then paragraph for points, and then paragraph for conclusion. Okay, don't worry so much on in terms of the sentences, grammar ke, English ke. You can just imagine whatever that you want to write in point form tu, you just combine je jadi paragraph. I don't really mind on your macam English lah, tapi just make sure it's understandable lah. Janganlah macam hanging ke the sentences or too short ke. Okay, just very basic English. Okay, to explain on the points. Tapi don't write in point form. Okay, because in your exam, there will be marks allocated for introduction and conclusion and also in terms of flow. Okay, if you write point form, it'll be difficult for me to differentiate. Is this your introduction ke? This is your main point ke? So if you write in paragraph, then I know, okay, the first paragraph would be your introduction. Second paragraph, your main point, and then your conclusion. Okay. So questions that ask you to illustrate, you need to have a appropriate label lah, like I mentioned just now. So x-axis and y-axis. Okay, and for this one, kena ada correct graph lah. So effect of substrate, this is the shape of the graph. If he's asking you on temperature pH, then it will be different. Okay, so for enzyme questions, the idea is that you need to describe the graph, so what changes that you see, and then why the changes happen. Okay, so enzyme, we can always play around with the changes of active site. Okay, does the enzyme degrade? Does the enzyme denature? What happens to active site? Can the substrate still bind? So that is the points that you have to play around when it comes to explanation on enzyme. Okay, rate of reaction. Okay, so your answers lebih kurang ke with the ones that I've given here, or any difference? Or any question you want to ask for this one? Tak ada Okay. Do you want me to recap on any of these? Maybe tak faham ke kita boleh proceed? Okay, okay Diana. Alright. Okay. So this is one of the toughest reaction in this subject. Okay, carbohydrate metabolism, particularly this one lah, glycolysis. So the question is asking you how glucose is metabolized to yield energy. Okay, so if you go back to carbohydrate metabolism, we have several metabolic reactions. We have glycolysis, glycogenesis, glycogenolysis. So how do you know? This question is asking which metabolic reaction. What is the keyword here in this sentence? Any idea? How do you know this one is asking what? Okay, so in this case, you know lah glycolysis kan, but what is the hint in the question? Okay. So, alright. So carbohydrate metabolism, we have several metabolic reactions. It depends on our state. Okay. Is it after we have eaten something or after we have been fasting for quite some time? Okay, or fasting state. So in this question, the hint is here. To yield energy. Okay, so how glucose is metabolized to yield energy. So now you know there's an increase or input of glucose, and this glucose is contributing to energy. So this is the hint asking. So this question is asking you on glycolysis. Okay. Okay. So let me recap a bit on this so that you won't be confused. Okay, so how do you remember these terms? Because it sounds the same. So glycolysis, you have to remember, lysis means to lyse, to break down. So what is it breaking down? The glucose part. So glyco is the glucose part. So glycolysis basically means to break down glucose. Okay, and then we have TCA cycle. So TCA cycle is basically part of glycolysis. Okay, they extended. Okay, after pyruvate, then what happened? Okay, and then we have glycogenesis. So genesis means to create or to synthesis. Okay, to produce something new. So what is it producing? This is the thing that it's producing, glycogen. So genesis is producing glycogen. So that's why the definition is synthesis of glycogen. Okay, same goes to glycogenolysis. So this one is lysis. So it means it has to be broken down. So what is it breaking down? Glycogen. So conversion of glycogen. And then we have gluconeogenesis. So here it's genesis means, genesis means to produce or to synthesize something new. So what is it producing? Glucose. Neo means something new. Okay, so synthesis of glucose from non-carbohydrate source. So usually it's synthesis from carbohydrate source. Okay, but in gluconeogenesis is using something new, which is non-carbohydrate. Okay, so you can basically remember based on how you understand the terms. Okay, so that you won't be confused. Okay. So in this case, because it's asking how glucose is metabolized to yield energy, so the ones that we are going to focus into is basically glycolysis. Okay, we have 10 steps of glycolysis. Unfortunately, for this kind of question, you have to remember the whole 10 steps. Okay, but how do you secure marks for questions like this? Okay, 10 marks ni too little lah. Usually soalan macam ni dia akan more marks lah because there has a lot of points to be explained. Okay, so the easiest way for you to study on carbohydrate metabolism, especially because it has a lot of metabolic reactions, is based on this table over here. Okay, so this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 aspect over here would help you to secure at least 5 marks. Okay, so for example, glycolysis, you can start with the definition. So how glucose is metabolized to energy, we can say through the process of glycolysis. Okay, and then what is glycolysis? So it's basically, you can directly say breaking down of glucose to pyruvate, or you can say oxidation of glucose to pyruvate. or the metabolic reaction of glucose to pyruvate. Or if you cannot remember, you can just write in conversion of glucose to pyruvate. I'll still accept that, okay, for the definition. And then you already got 1 mark for definition. And then purpose. What is the purpose of glycolysis? So the question is already giving you the hint, which is to yield energy. So you can just expand a bit, okay, acquire energy from where? Pyruvate, basically the end point. Then where does glycolysis takes place? So it will be in the cytosol. Okay, and then the precursor and the final product. Precursor basically means what is the starting point? Who will start first? So in this case, the starting point, the precursor for this reaction would be glucose. Okay, and the final product would be pyruvate. So you already secure 5 marks over here. Okay, where to get more marks? Another secure points would be you explaining in general the equation of glycolysis. Let me check. I think it's in the, you can open the slides for carbohydrate metabolism. There's one general equation for glycolysis. So 1 molecule of glucose will produce 2 molecules of pyruvate, and then you need to mention how many molecules of ATP is being produced. Okay, for example, okay, I've written over here. So a glucose molecule, so 1 glucose molecule degraded into 2 molecules of pyruvate. So this reaction consume or uses or utilize, you can use either words, 2 ATP of molecules. 2 molecules of ATP. Okay, and then at the same time, 2 molecules of ATP and 2 molecules of NADH is broken down, making it the net gain is 8 molecules of ATP. And this whole reaction can happen aerobically with the presence of oxygen or anaerobically in the absence of oxygen. Okay, so this is your secured points. Okay, based on the location and then definition, precursor, final product, and then you explain on the general reaction. And then after you have mentioned all that, then you can start explaining on the step by step. Okay, from glucose to glucose 6-phosphate, for example. Yes, for this question, for you to get full marks, you need to write in the whole mechanism of reaction. So you need to have, what you need to have is basically, let me point out here. So you need to have, so this, for example, if you write in sentences, so glucose to glucose 6-phosphate. So the first sentence is the conversion of glucose to glucose 6-phosphate, that is 1 mark. And then you mention the enzyme is hexokinase, 2nd mark. So this is 1 mark, this is 2nd mark. And then glucose 6-phosphate converted into fructose 6-phosphate. So that is the 4th marks. Okay, and then you mention the enzyme's name. Okay, phosphoglucose isomerase, and so on. So that is how you get marks. You have to mention the molecule conversion and who catalyzes the reaction. Okay. So how do you basically remember this better is when you understand the reaction itself, the chemistry part of it. Okay. So if you look into, I have actually put this in the lecture notes. How do you basically understand this? For example, glucose to glucose 6-phosphate. So the difference now is that the phosphate group here is on the carbon 6. Okay, before this, we don't have any phosphate group. So this is the changes that happen. So this is the glucose molecule. Kat sini, this is glucose molecule. So you see no phosphate group. Okay, now glucose 6-phosphate, 1 phosphate group is attached. Okay, so how come now we have this phosphate group over here? So the enzyme that will be adding phosphate group is basically hexokinase. So hexokinase in general is basically either adding phosphate group or removing phosphate group. Okay. Sekejap lagi. Okay, chemical structure you don't need to include. What's important is the changes to conversion of molecules and which enzyme is involved. But for your own understanding, I suggest you when you study, you refer to the chemical structure. If not, it would be some alien words, you know, macam hexokinase ni apa, for example lah kan, if you don't remember chemistry. So sama, like glucose 6-phosphate to fructose 6-phosphate, you can see, okay, glucose 6-phosphate, we have 6 carbon. Fructose, although it's pentagon, but it has 6 carbon as well. So what changes is basically the position. So enzymes, so when it's in written form, it's actually the same. Okay, the chemical equation is actually the same. But if you look into 3D form, it's different. So when it has a similar chemical equation, but different 3D structure, we call them as isomers. So glucose 6-phosphate is actually an isomer of fructose 6-phosphate. So when there's changes in terms of its 3D structure, so the enzyme involved would be an isomerase because they are producing the isomer of it. This enzyme is causing glucose 6-phosphate to produce an isomer of itself. So that's why the name is isomerase, phosphoglucose isomerase. Okay, same goes to this one. Okay, fructose, this one is easier. Okay, fructose 6-phosphate converted into fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. Earlier on, phosphate group is only on the 6 carbon. Phosphate ni duduk dekat carbon number 6. Okay, but now after the reaction, we have 2 phosphate group at carbon number 1 and carbon number 6. So who is adding to this, adding phosphate group to this carbon? It's a kinase. So that's why we have kinase over here. Because kinase is either adding phosphate group or removing phosphate group. Just like the earlier on, kinase ni. So that is how you can try to understand the reactions lah. Okay. Let's say after you have understand the flow. So how do you remember? This is something that I can suggest to you that you can do mnemonics. Macam you create story. Like how we remember nama rainbow kan? Flow, susunan rainbow kan? Atroman lah semua tu. So you can do it for enzymes or the substrate itself, the molecule itself. So the one that I've given here is actually the name of enzyme. So it's starting from hexokinase, phosphoglucose isomerase. So this is in flow. Macam ni from 1 to 10. So people actually create like a story lah for you to better remember it. Okay, so this is after you have understand. You need to understand first so that you don't blindly remember lah things. Okay, so you can search later on mnemonics. So the terms is like this. Mnemonics. Mnemonics, glycolysis substrate or glycolysis molecule. Then mnemonics, enzymes of glycolysis. Macam tu. Okay, so dia akan ambil lah macam dia punya initial words, initial alphabet and then create story. Okay. But this is tough to remember. Okay, but don't worry. As long as you have this secure points over here. Macam ni kan. The definition, purpose, location, you can already secure marks. Okay, it's better for you to write in this rather than you tinggal je soalan tu. Okay. Okay. Any question for this second question?
No miss, cuma nak tanya. Semua subjek in biochemistry berapa ya?
Topik ke maksud dia?
Topik, yes.
Ada 14.
14.
Ha.
Okay. Semua tu akan masuk dalam final exam.
For MCQ, yes. You need to expect macam MCQ question ada about 25. So 25 question tu will cover all 14. But for essay, tak semua akan keluar. So we try lah practice nanti.
Okay, Miss.
Usually for essay, dia akan keluar yang all the metabolism. Macam carbohydrate metabolism, lipid metabolism, macam tu. Yang part yang
Once that
metabolism.
ada banyak proses lah.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So kejap kita take 2 minutes break macam tu. Boleh? Kita masuk balik at the same
Boleh,
link.
Miss. Boleh.
40.